President Trump just said he's considering the largest strike on Iran of this entire war. The same night, the US launched its 13th consecutive night of attacks. And in one Iranian city, the strikes just killed at least 4 people. Here's what's actually confirmed and what Trump's threat might mean next, in a week that's already brought a congressional vote, a jump in oil prices, and a fresh multi-billion-dollar funding request tied to this same campaign. Let's start with Trump's own words. Speaking to Axios, Trump said he's considering what he called a massive attack, one that would be bigger than anything the US has carried out so far in this war. He said he was close to making a decision. That comment came after another wave of Iranian retaliatory strikes on US allies in the Gulf, including a reported hit on a telecommunications tower in Kuwait, along with attacks affecting Bahrain and Jordan the same day. Kuwait's military said its air defenses were actively confronting what it called hostile missile and drone attacks. Bahrain's Interior Ministry sounded air raid sirens across the country, including in the capital Manama, urging citizens and residents to remain calm and head to the nearest safe location. Trump hasn't specified what a strike bigger than ever before would actually involve, whether that means more targets in a single night, a shift to infrastructure he's threatened before, or something else entirely. Now to what actually happened on the ground that same night. CENTCOM said US forces began a new round of strikes on Iranian military targets at 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time, marking the 13th consecutive night of this specific campaign. CENTCOM described the operation as targeting military command centers, drone storage facilities, communications networks, coastal surveillance sites, and maritime capabilities, framed as an effort to reduce threats to civilian mariners and commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Explosions were reported in multiple locations within hours of the strike's beginning. In Khuzestan province, Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency reported that a US missile strike on sites near Ahvaz killed 4 people and wounded 5 others, citing provincial authorities. Iran's Press TV separately reported the province's governor described it as a US strike specifically on the city of Ahvaz. CNN has said it cannot independently verify that death toll. In Markazi province, roughly 150 miles from Tehran, a site outside the city of Kondab was hit by 2 projectiles, according to the province's deputy governor, with authorities still assessing casualties and damage at the time of that report. Residents in Ahvaz also reported hearing explosions on Keshem Island and near Bandar Abbas, according to Al Jazeera's correspondent reporting from Tehran and Iran's Fars news agency. Fars specifically said the Bandar Abbas blasts came from the west of the city and from the Allahu Akbar Hills, an area that's been struck on multiple previous occasions throughout this war. Bandar Abbas serves as the base for Iran's southern naval fleet and is the country's largest container port. One outlet covering the campaign, BNE IntelliNews, described the Strait of Hormuz as having remained effectively closed to unauthorized traffic since Iran asserted control over transits in late February, a characterization that goes further than CENTCOM's own public statements, which have consistently maintained the waterway remains open to lawful shipping. That gap between how outside outlets are now describing the strait's practical status and how CENTCOM continues to describe it publicly is itself worth tracking as this war continues. The economic and political fallout from this stage of the war has become its own story. Brent crude broke $100 a barrel on the day of Trump's comments, the first time it's crossed that level since late May, as markets reacted to the combination of Trump's threat and the intensifying strikes. Inside the US, the financial cost of the campaign is now facing direct political pushback. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has put the war's cost to date at $37.5 billion, with the Pentagon requesting an additional $67 billion from Congress to continue operations. Hours before this round of strikes began, the U.S. House of Representatives voted 214 to 208 in favor of a resolution directing the withdrawal of U.S. forces from hostilities against Iran. That vote reflects a real and narrow divide in Congress over continuing the campaign, even as the administration presses ahead militarily on the same day the vote happened. A margin of 6 votes, 214 to 208, is close enough that a small shift in position from either party could change the outcome of a future vote on the same question, making this an ongoing rather than settled political fight. The resolution's practical effect on the administration's military decisions remains unclear, since directing a withdrawal through this kind of vote doesn't carry the same binding force as legislation that's been signed into law. Separately, Trump posted on Truth Social that Iranian funds currently held and controlled by the United States would be used to pay for damage done to ships, cargo, and related assets during this war. Iran's foreign minister responded by calling the seizure of a country's assets to cover unrelated claims an incendiary precedent. So how should we actually read Trump's biggest strike ever comment? Start with what it isn't. It isn't, at least based on what's been made public, a description of a strike that's already happened. It's a stated intention delivered to a news outlet about a decision Trump says he's close to making but hadn't yet made at the time of that interview. That distinction matters because this war has included previous instances of escalating rhetoric that preceded strikes matching the tone of the threat, and other instances where strong language wasn't immediately followed by a corresponding jump in the scale of military action, making the gap between what a president says and what happens next genuinely difficult to predict in real time. 13 consecutive nights of strikes is already the longest sustained campaign of this war. So, bigger than ever before would have to represent a genuine escalation beyond an already extended operation, not simply a continuation of the current pace. We've tracked this rhetorical pattern before across this conflict. Threats to hit bridges and power plants, warnings about seizing Karg Island, and promises of overwhelming retaliation after American casualties have all appeared at various points, some followed closely by matching military action, others remaining primarily rhetorical for extended periods before anything changed on the ground. That history doesn't tell us which category this specific threat falls into, but it does mean the phrase biggest strike ever carries less predictive weight on its own than it might in a conflict without that track record. The timing relative to Congress is also worth noting carefully. Trump's comments about a potentially larger strike came on the same day the House passed a resolution calling for U.S. forces to withdraw from hostilities. Whether that vote influences the administration's next moves, accelerates them, or has no bearing at all, isn't something that can be determined from the public statements available so far. What is clear is that the financial and political costs of this war are now being debated in Washington with the same intensity as the military details being reported out of Iran each night, a shift from earlier phases of the conflict when domestic political pushback was less prominent in day-to-day coverage. The casualty picture from Thursday night into Friday also deserves a careful read, the same way we've treated every casualty figure throughout this war. Iran's Tasnim news agency and Press TV both reported deaths in Ahvaz, but the exact toll, 4 killed according to Tasnim, came from provincial authorities rather than an independently verified count, and CNN's own reporting explicitly notes it could not confirm the figure. The strikes in Markazi province were still being assessed for casualties at the time they were reported, meaning the current picture from that specific location remains incomplete rather than final. Reports of explosions in Keshem and Bandar Abbas, meanwhile, came without confirmed casualty figures attached to them at all in the sourcing available for this update. A reminder that an explosion being reported and a casualty count being confirmed are 2 separate stages of information that don't always arrive together, or even on the same day. There's a broader pattern in tonight's targets worth naming. Bandar Abbas, hit again at the Allahu Akbar Hills, has now been targeted repeatedly across multiple separate nights of this campaign, making it one of the most frequently struck single locations in the entire war. Ahvaz, a provincial capital with a population in the hundreds of thousands, joining that list of repeatedly named cities, suggests the campaign's 13th night reached further into populated areas than a strictly coastal, shipping-focused campaign would typically require. None of that confirms Trump's threatened larger strike has already begun, but it does show the current campaign, even before any additional escalation, has already expanded past its original framing as a narrowly targeted response to shipping threats in the Strait of Hormuz. Khuzestan province specifically has now absorbed strikes across several different cities within its borders over the course of this campaign, Ahvaz, Andimeshk, and Omidyeh, among them according to various nights of reporting, making it one of the most consistently targeted regions in Iran throughout this entire war, rather than a location hit in isolation this week. Here's where this leaves things. Trump says he's considering the largest strike of the war and is close to a decision, without yet confirming when or whether it happens. The 13th consecutive night of U.S. strikes is already the longest sustained campaign since this war began, hitting targets from Ahvaz to Bandar Abbas to Markazi province in a single night. At least 4 deaths in Ahvaz remain unverified beyond Iranian state and semi-official media. Oil prices have crossed $100 a barrel for the first time in 2 months, a direct market reaction to the combination of the ongoing campaign and Trump's own public comments about escalating it further. Congress has voted narrowly to direct a withdrawal that the administration hasn't indicated it will follow, leaving a real gap between one branch of the U.S. government's stated position and the military campaign actually underway. And the Pentagon is now asking for tens of billions more dollars to keep the campaign running at its current pace, before any larger strike Trump has floated even begins. None of these threads, the threat, the nightly strikes, the congressional vote, or the financial request has resolved on its own as of this recording, which means the next few days carry more open questions than usual, even by this war's standards. We're not going to guess what bigger than ever before ends up meaning in practice. But we do want to ask you, when a president says he's close to a decision on the biggest strike of a war, does that kind of public signal change how you expect the next few days to unfold? Or does it feel like rhetoric you've heard before from this same conflict?